Hey guys, it's Michael Kummer here, and in today's video I want to compare two popular fitness, sleep and recovery trackers, the Biostrap and the Whoop. But before we get started, make sure you subscribe to my channel and you click on the little alert button so you get notified when I publish more fitness videos like this. Let's first talk about the hardware, beginning with the strap, because the strap is incredibly important to keep the sensor in close contact with your skin. Without a good fit, you won't get reliable data. So that's why the strap and the band are so important. And the Biostrap has a silicone band, which is very comfortable, I have to say. You don't really feel it. The only thing I'm not a fan of is the pin and tuck closure, because the fit is basically predetermined by the pre-punched holes in the strap. The other thing that I'm not a huge fan of is, to put that strap on and off with one hand, It's obviously doable, but it's a little bit inconvenient at times, especially if you're like in a rush, or when you don't take as much time as you could, or when you wear gloves, or anything else that could get in the way of quickly opening and especially closing the strap. And with the Whoop band on the other hand, it's very easy to take on and off. It's an elastic strap that can be infinitely adjusted, and that's really what I like about it. So I can make it just as tight and it stays in that setting, so it doesn't get looser or whatever over time, and it's very easy to take on and off. I just have to do like this and it's on. I can do it. I can just move it up my wrist if I want to. So if I'm wearing gloves, working out, or gymnastic grips or whatever, I can just move it back a little bit, and it's super easy to adjust, take on and off. And you might think, well, but how important is it? You don't take a strap on and off that often. Well, with the Biostrap you kind of do, because the battery only lasts 1.5 days on average, and so you have to charge it, and for that you have to take it off. I like this one a little bit better. It's easier to adjust, it's easier to move up and down, and it's easier to take on and off if you have to. Now the good news is, these are not your only wearing options. Biostrap has an arm band that you can use, so you can move the sensor up your forearm, and that's useful for a couple of different reasons. One is, if you're maybe a medical professional and you can't wear anything on your wrist because you don't want to contaminate the strap with pathogens or whatever, you can move it up your arm and then cover it with your clothing. And Whoop has a biceps band that you can use, and it's also useful if you wear gloves. If you do certain physical activity that involve gloves, like maybe boxing, maybe CrossFit, where you wear gymnastic grips, you can easily move it up here and it doesn't get in the way. And the same with the Whoop, you can wear a biceps band and that doesn't get in the way either. Now in terms of sensor, both devices have sensors built in, obviously, that can measure and keep track of biometrics. And let's talk about the biometrics first, and then we'll dive into the types of sensors, because there are different sensors that both devices have that are worth exploring. Now, from a biometrics perspective, let's talk about the ones first that both have in common, which includes obviously the heart rate and heart rate variability, so the timing between heartbeats. That's important for recovery tracking, that both can track. They both can keep tabs on movement. There is an accelerometer in both devices, so they can tell if you're moving your wrist, etc. That's important for fitness tracking. That's important for heart rate tracking as well, and for sleep tracking. They can track your respiratory rate, so how often you breathe. So that's something that both can do. And then in addition to that, Biostrap can keep tabs on your blood oxygen saturation, which Whoop cannot. However, Whoop can keep tabs on your ambient or skin temperature and electrodermal activity, which is the rate of electricity flowing through your skin. And these two are important for sleep tracking, and in particular for accurate sleep tracking. So let's talk about each of those sensors and how well they work and why they do what they do. Well, starting with the heart rate, which is the core sensor in either of those devices. And there are two major differences between the Biostrap and Whoop. Biostrap uses what's called a pulse oximeter, and that's a basically red light, near infrared light, shining onto your blood vessels and then interpreting the reflected light, or the light that gets reflected. And you might have seen pulse oximeters when you get your annual physical, whenever they clip that pulse oximeter on your finger to measure your SpO2, your blood oxygen saturation, as well as your heart rate, that's what they use in medical settings. So red light over here and green light in the Whoop. And green light is what most fitness trackers use as well, including the Apple Watch, which received FDA approval. So why would one company pick red light versus green light? And there are pros and cons to each of those technologies. The pro or the advantage of a pulse oximeter is that it can penetrate the skin deeper, and it can keep tabs on biometrics such as blood oxygen saturation or SpO2, which green light based technology cannot, because it doesn't penetrate the skin as much. So you might think, well, red light is better, right? Well, maybe, but the problem with red light is that it's more prone to noise. So it has a higher signal to noise ratio, and it's also prone to motion artifacts. So if you move a lot, if there is ambient light coming onto the sensor, all of that might negatively impact the quality of the signal that you receive or that the sensor receives. And so it's not ideal in every situation. It's very valuable if you're completely still, but for workout tracking, etc., red light has disadvantages. Now, the green light has been much more researched, it's been around for longer, and most fitness trackers use it. It's not as prone to a high signal to noise ratio, but it penetrates the skin less deep, and more of the green light can get absorbed by the skin, leading to a weaker signal that gets bounced back to the sensor. And that's especially true if you have darker skin color. If there is a lot of melanin in your skin, the pigment, or if you have tattoos, in those cases, a green light based sensor might actually have more troubles getting a good signal than the red one. So there are pros and cons to both approaches. I don't really have a strong opinion on either one. Maybe in the future, as battery life technology improves, as the size of the sensors improve, maybe at some point we'll get products that have both, the best of both worlds, so to say. For now, you should know that red light in the Biostrap, green light in the Whoop, and there are pros and cons to both of them. The second thing we should talk about is the accelerometer. That's the ability, or that enables those devices to detect movement. Now, that's important obviously for activity tracking, especially activity that involves arm movement. And it's also important for sleep tracking. Both devices obviously leverage the accelerometer to detect movement or lack of movement. Now, Biostrap, in addition to the wrist-worn sensor, also has what they call a shoe pod. So it's like a little extra sensor with an accelerometer that you can clip on your shoe or wear on your, socks, if you wear socks while sleeping, to detect leg movement. And that improves the accuracy of detecting certain types of movement where you don't use your hands a lot. Like, maybe if you dance like I do with no hand movement, then a shoe pod can help the Biostrap to detect that movement and interpret it as physical activity. Next, let's talk about two sensors that are exclusive to Whoop, and that is the ambient temperature and the electrodermal activity sensors. And those are incredibly important for sleep tracking and for detecting the stage of sleep that you are in, because both your skin conductance as well as your skin temperature, and also core temperature for that matter, change as you fall asleep and during certain stages of sleep. I've talked about that at length in my Whoop review, so check that out. But the bottom line really is, to get accurate sleep tracking, you need additional sensors to help Whoop figure out if you're sleeping in the first place, because lack of movement and low heart rate are not necessarily reliable indicators that you're sleeping. The next one is respiratory rate. So how often you breathe per minute. And that's typically done using the accelerometer. So as you move your chest while breathing, those sensors can pick that up and can tell how often you breathe per minute. Your respiratory rate is very consistent. Mine is about 14 point something breaths per minute while I'm sleeping. If that were to go up to 16 or 17, that would be an indication that something is off with my pulmonary system and my lungs. I'm breathing more often for no good reason, or the reason in many cases is maybe an infection. The last sensor I want to talk about is one exclusive to the Biostrap, and that's the blood oxygen saturation. As I've mentioned before, only red light based sensors, meaning pulse oximeters, can detect blood oxygen saturation. So that's why only Biostrap can do it, and so it can help you figure out if your oxygen saturation changes. And that's another indication. If that suddenly drops or is lower than your baseline, that's again also an indication that maybe there is something wrong, that you're not breathing enough, maybe you're suffering from sleep apnea, etc., etc. Anything that could cause your amount of oxygen in your bloodstream to go down. Now, before we move on to the software and to the sleep, recovery and activity tracking, let's talk about another important aspect, and that's sample frequency, meaning how often does the sensor keep tabs on and read your biometrics. Now, with Biostrap, out of the box, it takes a reading every 10 minutes. If you sign up for the optional sleep lab subscription, I think they call it, then while you're sleeping, the sensor measures your biometrics every 2 minutes. So out of the box, 10 minutes, with the extra subscription, every 2 minutes. Whoop, on the other hand, samples your biometrics 100 times per second. And that's a huge difference, and that's important because the more often you keep tabs on your biometrics, the easier it is to detect changes in heart rate. You know, if the heart rate suddenly goes up and spikes during a physical activity, or if it suddenly drops, maybe as you enter deep sleep, etc. By doing it more often, you get a better and more reliable picture of what your body is doing. So from a sample frequency, Whoop here is the clear winner in my opinion, and it provides a much better picture of how my biometrics change and what that means to the state, to the physical state my body is in. Now let's talk about the software and the mobile applications that come with both platforms, starting with the Biostrap app. So when you launch the Biostrap app, what you see is a dashboard of information like your current activity, your recovery score, your sleep score, the steps you've taken, and some other biometrics that are more or less relevant. But you also see your resting heart rate, your heart rate variability, my respiratory rate, and my oxygen saturation. So that I can see right here on the dashboard. If I swipe down, I can force a synchronization between the strap and the phone, or from the phone to the cloud. So that's convenient. Then I have a menu down there where I can switch between different screens, and one is record, and that allows you to record on-demand biometrics. So I can say, send me an email, so record my biometrics for the next 30, 60 or whatever seconds, and then send me a report with everything that the device captured. I can also manually record sleep and do some with the sleep lab, that optional subscription I've mentioned before. I don't have that, so it's locked. I can record an activity, meditation, etc. Then I get insights, is meant to give you, well, as the name implies, insights into how you compare. So I can say, okay, based or compared to the general Biostrap population, that I can filter by gender or age. This is how I do, meaning how my HRV is, how my resting heart rate, respiratory rate, total sleep, etc. So I can pick from different biometrics and compare to everyone else who uses Biostrap. How useful is that? Well, I think it's fun to see how you do, but it doesn't really help me improve my sleep or get a higher recovery score or increase my HRV or anything. I also get a radar chart, which is fun to see, like all the biometrics in one kind of chart. But again, it's not incredibly helpful. And then we have settings where I can see the battery status. That's actually the only way to get to the battery, because the sensor or the strap itself does not have anything that would tell me what the battery level is. In comparison to Whoop, we'll talk about it later when we talk about battery life, but I can just double tap it and I can see little LEDs that indicate what the battery status is. For Whoop, I have to get into the settings, and I can also see the sync state, turn on airplane mode, and do a couple of other things that you might find useful. Now, with that said, let's hop over to the Whoop app and see what you can do in there. So when I launch the Whoop app, what I see is also a today's view of my biometrics. I can see my recovery score, I can see my day strain, I can see calories burned, my HRV, heart rate variability, And the sleep, I can also see, I have the ability to add workouts if I want to, like I can add a workout here. I can see the battery status and the synchronization status, so I see all of that right here on the main screen. There is also a menu where I can go into different sections. I can get my weekly performance assessment, which is similar to Insights, but I think much more insightful, because it tells you, and in particular the monthly and annual performance assessment, they tell you how your lifestyle choices impacted your recovery and sleep, so you can make changes and improve. I can join different groups that I have here, and then from a main app perspective I can swipe. So with Whoop there is a swipe up and a swipe left to right, and that's in the beginning takes some getting used to. So I think the learning curve of the Whoop app is a little bit steeper than the Biostrap. So here I can see my day strain, one over I can see my recovery. If I swipe up I can see my recovery over the past couple of days, my HRV, my resting heart rate, how that has changed with the 7-day average. One more over is then my sleep analysis. I can see how many hours of sleep I needed versus what I've gotten and what my sleep performance is. So I got 95%. So let's talk about activity tracking, not necessarily from an application perspective, but more from a technological perspective. Now, activity tracking is the least important feature of any of these two devices as far as my interests are concerned. And one of the reasons is that I am aware of that activity tracking, heart rate tracking, and calorie tracking is incredibly difficult for wrist-worn technology. And besides, I'm not a professional athlete. I don't care really how many calories I've burned. It doesn't really impact how I eat. It's not super important. Now, of course, if you're a professional athlete, like an endurance athlete, you know, it might be more important that you stay within a certain heart rate zone throughout the workout or throughout, you know, a race, etc. And that's where activity tracking becomes more important. Now, but the thing is, wrist-worn devices are not very good at it. Now, the advantage that Biostrap here has is it offers a chest strap, which is significantly more reliable to detect quick changes of heart rate and, well, keep tabs on your heart rate overall while you work out. And so I really like that Biostrap has the chest strap, not because I want to use it. I don't, again, care much about activity tracking, but I appreciate that for someone who needs to know what the heart rate is during physical activity, the additional chest strap can really make Biostrap significantly more accurate than by just using the wrist-worn sensor. Right? So from an activity tracking perspective, I think the point goes to Biostrap if you use the chest strap, okay? And again, if that's important to you, get the chest strap and you'll be much happier with Biostrap, I think. So keeping tabs of your heart rate during physical activity is one thing. The other thing that some people like to keep tabs on is their calorie burn, and in particular the active calorie burn, because that might give them an indication of how much they can eat on a given day. And the problem with that approach is that both devices can only guess what your so-called basal metabolic rate is, meaning the amounts of calories that you burn by not doing anything, by just living basically, by your body functioning. And in order to find out your basal metabolic rate, or BMR, you have to wear a mask basically that keeps tabs on your CO2, etc., that you exhale and the O2 that you inhale to establish that BMR. Without that, both devices guess your BMR based on your height, your weight, your age, etc., your gender maybe, but it's unreliable. Okay, so if you look at your Biostrap or Whoop or Apple Watch or whatever and you're like, oh, I only burned 500 calories, that might not be accurate at all, okay? So don't get too hung up on those numbers. Now, one thing that I want to mention, however, is that the relative change in calorie burn, if your Whoop today reports 500 active calories burned and tomorrow 600 active calories burned, that difference, that delta, is still accurate, but the absolute number might not be. So keep that in mind when looking at the calories burned or overall, calorie tracking. The second thing I want to talk about, and that's one of the most important aspects for me of any tracker, is recovery tracking. Because recovery tracking not only tells me obviously how recovered I am when I wake up in the morning and how much I should exert myself, how much I should maybe push it during a workout, but it also tells me overall how recovered my body is, because that might influence not only workouts, but also other activities. Maybe if I know that I am running on fumes and that I'm not recovered at all, maybe it's not a good day to start skydiving or something else. So that's why I'm so focused on recovery tracking, because in addition to knowing what my current recovery score is, I also want to find out how I can improve it. How can I not wake up with a poor recovery score? And that's really where I think Biostrap is a little bit weak. Before we talk about that, let me quickly tell you how recovery tracking works in general, so you understand of what a recovery score even means. Generally speaking, there are four components that go into a recovery score, and one of the most important ones is your heart rate variability during deep sleep. So heart rate variability is the timing between heartbeats. And the more that timing varies between heartbeats, so that variability between those heartbeat timings are an indirect indication of how your nervous system is doing, meaning how much competition there is between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. I'm not going to go into too many details because I've covered all of that in my Whoop video review, so check that out. I'm going to link it down below and up there in a card. But the bottom line really is, the higher the HRV, the more recovered you are, because the more your parasympathetic nervous system has taken over basically. So it's the rest and digest and etc. So that's one component, HRV. The second one is your resting heart rate. The lower your resting heart rate is, the less your body is repairing or fighting an infection or whatever the case might be. If your resting heart rate goes up, then there is a reason for that, okay? And then your sleep, obviously, meaning your overall sleep. You can't get a high recovery if you only slept 2 hours last night. And then the quality of your sleep, of course, because you can spend 10 hours in bed, but if you have poor sleep with no deep sleep, no REM sleep, etc., or very little, then likely your recovery rate is going to be lower as well. So those are the four factors that typically play into calculating the recovery score. All of those four factors are also closely related to sleep, because HRV only makes sense to capture during deep sleep. So it's important for the sensor to figure out when you are in deep sleep. The same goes with resting heart rate. It's probably throughout the night, and then the quality of sleep is includes deep and REM sleep and other stages of sleep. So it's important for the sensor to accurately detect sleep and the stages of sleep to calculate a good recovery score. So let's go back into the Biostrap app and look at the recovery. So the first thing you see is you see a recovery score, 62 out of 100. And a circle and color indication of what that 62 means, and it says ready. I guess I'm ready for the day. It's not very intuitive what the color coding and the terminology means, in my opinion. We'll see then later with Whoop, they use red, yellow, green, which is, I think, much more indicative and much more intuitive of how I should interpret my recovery score. Here I just see ready. Okay, so I can see it has improved from last time. I can see the sleep and the resting heart rate, and I see the contributing factors like my nocturnal HRV, my resting heart rate, sleep efficiency, and total sleep duration. So those are the factors that Biostrap takes into account when calculating the recovery score. So let's look at the Whoop app and see what that tells me here. So if I swipe over to the recovery, I can see my recovery score, 58%, and I can see yellow. So Whoop has, as I've mentioned before, 3 colors, red, yellow, and green. In here in that section, I don't get any indication either of what might have caused a poor recovery. But as soon as I go into, let's say, my annual performance assessment, for example, it loads a PDF, and in here, if I turn this around so you can maybe see it better, I can tell that the lifestyle choices I've made based on the questions that I chose to answer, I can see how those have impacted my sleep performance, sleep efficiency, resting heart rate, HRV, recovery, respiratory rate, and sleep consistency. So I can get actionable intel in what I have done and how that has affected my sleep and my recovery. And so I can make changes to my lifestyle. And that's really one of the most important aspects of Whoop. It gives me that information that I can use to make changes and to improve both my physical performance during workout, my mental performance, my sleep, my recovery, everything. But now Whoop has what they call a journal. I can pick from any of these factors and lifestyle choices and choose to answer them every morning. And then Whoop can correlate my answers with my biometric data. And I can then find out if maybe wearing a sleep mask improves my sleep, and as a result my recovery score is higher. Or if I supplement with CBD oil, how does that change my sleep and recovery? So there are a lot of factors that I can keep tabs on, so Whoop can correlate them. And that's really the power of the Whoop platform and the clear advantage Whoop has over every other fitness, sleep and recovery tracker, including the Biostrap. So next, let's talk about sleep tracking, because sleep is obviously the foundation of everything. If you don't sleep well, nothing else matters. And obviously with poor sleep, your recovery is gonna be poor as well. So let's talk about sleep tracking here as far as the Biostrap app is concerned. So when you click on your sleep score, you can see the score again here of 80 out of 100. You can see the sleep time, your resting heart rate, some of the things that I answered. So that's what Biostrap asks me every morning. How did I sleep? How did I wake up, etc. It doesn't really do anything with the information. It doesn't correlate it with anything, but you can see it here. And then I can see the different stages of sleep that I were in, including awake, light, and deep. Now what's interesting and confusing at the same time, I think, is that Biostrap combines deep or slow wave sleep with REM sleep, and they just call it deep sleep. Now, it's true that both are restorative phases of sleep, but they are completely different from a data perspective. So if you look at brain waves, or if you look at resting or your heart rate, deep sleep is completely different to REM sleep. REM is an active phase of sleep where memory consolidation occurs. So you see potentially spikes in heart rate in a different brainwave pattern. Deep sleep is where you're like a vegetable. There is no movement going on. Your resting heart, your heart rate is typically very low, and no movement and no outside influences and factors that can maybe disturb you or that you would be aware of. So it's completely different, but Biostrap, for whatever reason, lumps them together, and I don't know exactly why that is. But what you can also see is, you can see your heart rate, your HRV, your SpO2, your respiratory rate, the total time in bed, how many minutes you were awake, spent in light sleep, deep, HRV, etc., etc. And the onset of sleep and the wake up time. Now, what I've noticed with Biostrap is that it not always and accurately detects sleep onset, and it's highly inaccurate based on what I see here in terms of sleep stage detection. And I think the reason for that is that it's lacking two sensors that Whoop has, and that is the ambient temperature and electrodermal activity. So what Biostrap does instead, it looks at movement or lack of movement. So if you're still and don't move, then that's an indication for Biostrap that you might be sleeping, and your heart rate. And let me go back here a couple of days or weeks and see if I can find a sleep data from where it was clearly off. So here is one example of, it was from June 13th. It was one of the first days after I've gotten Biostrap. And I put it on and I was wearing the strap all day. And then in the evening, my wife and I typically sit on the couch and we watch TV. So that's a time where I don't move a lot, where I'm like staring at the screen like a zombie, I suppose. And because I'm sitting and not moving, my heart rate is relatively low. And so Biostrap thought I was sleeping. And that was at 7:41 p.m. It thought I was falling asleep. But I was sitting and watching TV until 8 or 10 or something like this. So it incorrectly identified lack of movement and low heart rate with being asleep. And that's really the issue that most fitness and sleep trackers on the market have, if they don't have the additional sensors like Whoop has. You cannot use lack of movement and low heart rate as an indication of sleep. That's simply not the case, as we can see clearly here. And I'm like, okay, in fact, once I've seen this, my opinion of Biostrap was already made at this point for the most part, because if it cannot detect that I'm sleeping, then everything that follows, meaning the sleep stage analysis, my recovery, none of that is reliable if the core data, the core biometrics is not reliable to start with, you know? And so that was one case where I've noticed, okay, so evidently Biostrap cannot accurately detect sleep. The other thing then, what I've noticed is, in the last few days, what I've done is I didn't wear Biostrap until I went to bed. So once I went to bed, I put it on, and then, since I'm typically someone, you know, once I hit the pillow, within 10 minutes I fall asleep. If that's the case, then Biostrap can relatively accurately detect when I'm sleeping and when I wake up, because, you know, as I lie down, I move a little bit in the beginning, and then once I fall asleep, I don't move anymore and my heart rate goes down. So then it's relatively easy for Biostrap or for a Fitbit or for any of the other sleep trackers to figure out when you're sleeping. However, if you're just lying there and you can't sleep, but you're trying really hard and you don't move, technology like this might still think you're sleeping, whereas you're not. And then the other example I want to show you from last night here, that's, as I said, you know, where it fairly accurately detected my sleep onset and my wake up time, especially in comparison to Whoop, which I'm going to show you next. But one thing that I've noticed is the deep sleep it recorded. And remember, Biostrap combines deep sleep and REM sleep into one number. So Biostrap thought that I spent only 1 hour and 27 minutes in restorative phases of sleep. If that was the case, I would have woken up feeling like crap and I would be tired all day, because that's not nearly enough restorative sleep, meaning deep and REM sleep, that I need to recover. And so let's hop over to Whoop and see how Whoop is doing. Now, it also, if I scroll up here or click on here, you can see that Whoop thought that I fell asleep at 9:02. So that's relatively close to the 9:04 of Biostrap, and it might just be that, you know, the longer sampling rate of Biostrap caused that 2-minute delay. And then also accurately detected that I woke up at 5:35. That's when I looked at my Apple Watch on my nightstand. But what you see is way different is that my REM sleep that I had, according to Whoop, was 2 hours and 31 minutes, and my deep sleep was 1 hour and 51 minutes. So the sleep stage analysis of Whoop is significantly more accurate and usable. And there are validation studies that were done by third parties and universities that prove that Whoop is an accurate sleep tracker. And so I trust the Whoop data, and if I see then data from other devices like the Biostrap that are way off, I can only assume that's thoroughly inaccurate data. And so the implication of that is that if you're interested in sleep analysis and improving your sleep, Biostrap might not be the best device there is. Whoop is much more reliable. The other implication of that is if sleep data and sleep tracking are inaccurate, then your recovery data is going to be inaccurate as well. Because if Biostrap cannot reliably detect when you are in deep sleep, then it doesn't know when to take a measurement of your HRV, because HRV can only be or should only be measured during deep sleep when there are no influencing factors, and that is because your HRV constantly changes. So as I'm talking to you, my HRV constantly changes. And so it doesn't make sense to measure it while I'm awake and there are a lot of influencing factors. It only makes sense to measure HRV during deep sleep. And so that means the device has to be able to accurately detect when you are in deep sleep to take an HRV measurement, because that's the most important factor for recovery tracking and analysis. And because Biostrap is highly unreliable measuring or detecting sleep and the stages of sleep, I cannot possibly trust that the recovery tracking is any more reliable, because that relies on unreliable sleep data, you know? Next, let's talk about battery life and charging. And that's another area where I think Whoop clearly wins, because the Biostrap's battery lasts about 1.5 days. Officially, they say charge it every day, or they recommend charging it every day because it won't last more than 2 days. In my experience, about 1.5 days is how long my strap lasts. And the problem is that I have to take it off, so there is a lapse in biometric data, and I have to remember to put it back on. And now with the Apple Watch, which doesn't last much longer than a day and a half either. I have an evening routine. When I go to bed, I put it on my nightstand on the charger, and in the morning I put it right back on. I can't do that with the Biostrap because I want it to track my sleep obviously, and then my recovery. So I have to wear it at night, and that's a little bit of a bummer because it really gets old, taking it off every other day. And now you can see getting it on is a pain in the butt too. But that's really, where Whoop has a clear advantage, because I never have to take the strap off my wrist. It comes with a battery pack that I can slide on, and I can wear it at night or anytime pretty much, except when I go into the shower, because the battery pack, unlike the strap, is not water resistant. But other than that, I can charge it while wearing the sensor on my wrist, and then I simply plug in the battery pack to USB and it charges. And the way I basically do is whenever the strap indicates like 20 or so percent, I slide on the battery pack and it's charged in, I don't know, an hour or so, maybe 1.5. I take it off, immediately charge the battery pack, and so it's ready for next time that I need it. And so I never have to take off the strap, and it lasts, but even so, this strap lasts 5 days. So it's not as frequent as the Biostrap that I have to remember and charge it ultimately. So here the clear winner is the Whoop. And the other thing I can tell by tapping, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is an LED in here. I'm going to do a close-up then, where you can see the level of the battery. There are 3 LEDs, 1, 2, and 3, and it indicates how charged the battery is. So I can tell by just tapping without having to go to the app. With Biostrap, I have to go into the app and into settings to see what the battery life is. Now, of course, the app can send you notifications. They just made an update, so at 50% you get a reminder, at 20%, at 10%. So you do get those reminders on your phone, but it's still, a little bit more cumbersome than just sliding something on and going about your day. Next, let's talk about pricing. Now, there are differences between the pricing models of Biostrap and Whoop. The Biostrap you buy upfront, meaning you pay for the hardware. I think it starts at $175 or so. There are different kits. There is one that's only the strap. There is one that's the shoe pod, that includes the shoe pod and the armband. So there are different options that you can get, and obviously the more hardware you get, the more expensive it gets. I just got the basic strap, and I think I paid $175-ish. And then there is no monthly fee unless you want to do the sleep lab or the meditation lab or some of those extra services that you would then have to pay additional money for. Whoop has a different strategy. You don't pay for the hardware up front. You enter into a subscription with a minimum term of 6 months. So effectively, if you only commit to 6 months, you spend about $180 out of pocket. So they are fairly similarly priced if you just look at it from a 6 months perspective. The longer you commit to Whoop, the lower the monthly price is. If you commit to 18 months, the price goes down to about $18 a month. If you only commit to 6 months, which is the shortest duration, it's $30 a month. So 30 times 6 is the $180 that you'd ultimately spend on the Whoop. So different pricing models. There are pros and cons to either approach, buying the hardware versus paying for a subscription. What I really like with Whoop is they constantly come out with new features that work on the existing hardware. More insights. The Whoop journal was a recent addition, etc. So they really put in a lot of effort in making the platform better, and that kind of justifies the monthly price that I pay for it. If you want to give Whoop a try, I have a discount link, not a code anymore. It used to be a code, now it's just a link, so look down. And if you use that link, then you get 10% off, and I get a commission. As I've mentioned before, I'm an affiliate, and that helps, pay for videos like this. So thank you if you use my link. And that wraps it up for today's review and comparison between the Biostrap and the Whoop. So in a nutshell, you can get good information out of both devices, but if you're particularly concerned about sleep tracking and recovery tracking and finding out what lifestyle choices you can take on or modify to get better sleep, to get higher recovery, then I think Whoop is the platform to go, because it correlates your lifestyle choices with your biometrics and gives you insights into what your body is trying to tell you. Biostrap, on the other hand, does some basic sleep tracking and recovery tracking and activity tracking, but the areas that I'm most concerned about, and that is sleep and recovery, I've seen to be relatively inaccurate, and so I can't necessarily rely on the data, and more importantly, none of the data is correlated with my lifestyle choices, so I can't really determine what I need to change to improve that. So in the bottom line, if you have to choose between these two, I would go with Whoop any day of the week. Let me know what you think, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, this button seems to be working as well. Until next time.